That was a social experiment conducted in October of 2017, before the dark ages of COVID. He and many others have been unfairly judged because of their skin color. It poisons our conversations and weaves its way into lives and relationships, and we ignore it because we don't think there's anything we can do about it.
Racism, as described by the dictionary, is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. Essentially, any negative bias against another racial group. When someone says racism, they usually think of extremes, like secretly hating anyone whose skin is more than 3 shades darker than theirs, or irrationally fearing all of a different background and look than them. Although these are examples of racism, racism is not limited to the extremes, like Sharon called Jimmy a black pig. Sharon is racist. No. Racism is when you see a group of black males and think, oh, there they go again. Racism is when you feel uncomfortable around an African American with a tattoo. Racism is when you feel even slightly ashamed to be associated with someone of color. It's that feeling of superiority over someone that you've always known but never questioned. Racism still exists, and it's much more subtle than people realize.
In order to understand how to stop racism and get people not to metaphorically turn their noses up at those different from them, we need to know why. Just why? Why do people decide that a certain group should be licking the mud? Well, the reason racism was spawned, at least in America, was because people were selfish and wanted land for themselves, but they were also insecure and wanted people beneath them to make them feel better about themselves, like a bunch of middle school bullies. They used every excuse they could find. Religion, science, they'd claim it was a necessity. They claimed that they were the superior race, when in reality, it was just an excuse for laziness and selfishness. That's only allowed when food is involved. Fast forward to today, and people are racist because they were raised that way, because it's what their parents taught them, whether it was intentional or in practice. So whether they like it or not, they have some level of bias, because that's just how everyone around them was. It's the type of environment they were raised in. It's not just what the parents teach either, but society in general. Stereotypes are often reflected in a negative light towards black people, so when all the TV shows you watch show only white people, you kind of start to prefer them. It's not the fault of anyone still alive, but it's a reality. It needs to be corrected.
So yes, racism is real. You might be wondering just how real it is and how big of a problem it is. Allow me to show you. This is a graph showing the rate of employment in different ethnicities in the US. As you can see, the employment rate for African Americans is significantly lower than that of both white and Hispanic. Employers are neglecting applications from them because of racial bias and discrimination, especially when the line drops in late 2008. The white employment rate is very steady, only dropping as much as anyone else because of economic crises.
Everything up to this point has been explaining and diving deep into the mechanics and origins of racism. There is, however, an elephant in the room we haven't addressed yet. Why should you care? I mean, really, why should white people care whether or not racism is a thing? Doesn't affect you, right? Your kids are safe, your family is safe, you are safe from bias, so why should you give a crap about black people? Well, other than your literal morality, you are actually affected by racism in very significant ways. When you hate a specific group of people just because they're different, it makes that group feel ashamed of what makes them different. Just like in Dr. Seuss's Sneetches, they don't believe they're inferior, but they're willing to change about them what makes people believe that they are, or just end it. It makes them feel sadness at the thought that their children will have to work twice as hard to get half as much, or even that they might be shot just for taking a walk, but most of all they feel anger. Rage that some group of people think they're superior without any reason for it. Absolute disgust and fear towards all people of the other race because they don't know who would or wouldn't shoot their child. Those are very strong emotions that fuel change. Oh sure, we start with peaceful protests and sessions where we talk about changes we can make towards racism, but all that is so that white people will make the change. If nothing happens, they will get violent. We've already seen a preview of that with riots of people who don't want to wait anymore. When you set one group as superior to another, it just becomes a brewing stand for conflict. By continuing to disregard and deny the injustice that you have the ability to help fix, you only continue to throw more wood into the fire. Turning a blind eye at racism does just as much damage as racism itself. Imagine if you had cancer and somebody claimed that it didn't exist. Racism leads to division and conflict. Just look at the Holocaust.
Racism is something that stays under the radars of our minds unless we actively look for it. It exists in the conversations we have with other people, whether they're openly racist or not. It's seen, at times, in our friends, our neighbors, and yes, even us. You might not like to admit it, but you've probably said something that you didn't really mean about someone else. The first step to ending racism is recognizing it. Be honest and look for it. Once you find the racist thoughts and biases, end them. They don't need to be floating around in your head. They serve no good purpose there. When you can get rid of your own bias, encourage others to get rid of theirs.
Once you realize and renounce your bias, the change really starts to be set in motion. Admitting you have a problem opens the door to a solution. If you pretend there's no issue, you are also neglecting the solution to that issue. Denial ceases self-growth. Becoming aware of it won't fix the problem, but it's a start. It gives the opportunity to fix it and help others who are still in denial. Maybe there is no bias and you're completely impartial, but you'll never know unless you look for yourself. After all, it's a leap of faith.